Hello and welcome everyone to the Swope Health Black History Series. My name is Duran McGee and I am we're in our first week of the Black History Series and I'm proud to have our first guest, Alvin Brooks. Many of you know him if you've lived in Kansas City. I've lived here most of my life, and if you didn't know, Mr. Brooks recently just published a book about a year and a half ago. Just give you a little bit background on Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks um, um, served as mayor pro tem for the city of Kansas City on the city council here. He is a graduate of UMKC. Also, he went to Lincoln Junior College. Mr. Brooks is also a former police officer with the city of Kansas City. He has 6 children, and he has been a lifelong servant here in Kansas City. He was married to his beloved wife, Carol, who I knew was a great lady. For over 40 years, they were married, and he has been active in Kansas City government. He was one of the leading anti-crime leaders in our community, leading the ad hoc group against crime. If you have not had a chance to check out his book, I encourage you to get it. It's a book, the title is Binding Us Together. It's the story of a civil rights activist and reflects on a lifetime of community and public service. So I want to welcome you, Mr. Brooks. Thank you for being here with Swope Health today.
There's a dream in the land with its back against the wall. By mother's name and strain, this dream is sometimes called. There are those that claim this dream for theirs alone, a sin for which we know they must atone. Unless this dream is shared in common like sunlight and like air, this dream would die for lack of substance anywhere. This dream knows no frontier or class. It knows no class nor race. But this dream cannot be held in any one secure place. But today, this dream is in battle with its back against the wall. But to save the dream for one, it must be saved for all. Good afternoon to everyone out there who are in Central Standard Time. And Duran, thank you very much for the introduction. Now, let me make a couple of corrections. My wife and I were married for 63 years. And if she was still living, it would be 72 years. So thank you so very much. Good to be with you and to talk about African American History Month. And really, you know, there is no real African American history because the history of African Americans is a part of American history, although it's left out. So let me start out with a question. And I want to sort of challenge our minds this afternoon, if you don't mind. Is there the possibility that America never intended for the descendants of slaves to ever be totally free, equal in these United States of America? Is there a possibility that America never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free and have access and equal opportunities in these United States of America? Now let's go to a little history. 1619, when some 20 to 30 slaves first touched upon these shores there in Virginia. And they were chattel. And the real challenge came in 1857 in the case of Sanford, Frederick Ducks, not Frederick Ladd, the whole bit of when the person who was a slave at that time it was so interesting that in this Dred Scott case that originated right here in the state of Missouri, the Sanford was the family that owned him, and Dr. Sanford was in the Army and traveled around, and so Douglas went around with him all the time that everywhere he went in the free states. And so what happened is that when they came back to the state of Missouri, that case was filed in the court. Now the trial court upheld that certainly that Dred Scott had gone to those free states and should be free. So it was appealed to the Missouri Supreme Court. They reversed that decision. Dred Scott then took it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court in 1857, under Roger B. Taney and a 7-2 vote, and Roger B. Taney was the Chief Justice and wrote the decision, saying that first of all, no black man had rights that a white man needed to respect. But also in that, he said that even in that majority decision, it said that even where free blacks were in free states, they could not be citizens of the United States. and went on to say that in those territories in the Missouri Compromise, that the agreement was made between the Confederacy and the Union after they came back into the, this was before the Civil War, that unless, that even in those cases, blacks could not be free. And finally, that no government entity, Congress included, could pass laws prohibiting slavery. But let's fast forward to now Lincoln's period of time in the 1860s. In 1865, the Congress passed the 13th Amendment, freeing the slaves. It was a real period of Reconstruction. And then the 14th Amendment made them citizens. And the 15th Amendment gave them the right to vote. And here in 2023, we're still trying to find the right to vote for the descendants of slaves. And let's talk about Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, when Plessy boarded a train that was owned by the Ferguson Company and refused to go to the colored corps, quote unquote, sued and went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says that as long as something is equal, it could be separate. But then, of course, in Brown versus Board of Education, May 17, 1954, in the Warren Court, in a 9-0 vote, that's when that decision was reversed. And in the Warren Court, it says that nothing can be separate and equal. Now, let's look at all the laws that have been passed, all the decisions that have been made. In 2022-23, we're still talking about equal rights for the descendants of slaves. Let me ask the question, to pose the question again. Is there the possibility that America never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free? I want that to resonate with each one of us who are on this Zoom today. Is it the possibility that America never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free? And then our First Nation people, the Native Americans who, when Columbus supposedly discovered America, great civilization. Now, you know, Columbus really didn't discover America. He got lost. He thought he was in the West Indies and the Indians found him. But then it wasn't until the 1920s that the Indians even had right in their own land. Is there the possibility that even the Native Americans, our brothers and sisters of indigenous people, is there a possibility that they were never in the United States supposed to be totally free? Because they're a nation and a nation. And all those treaties have been broken by the United States government between those various Indian nations and the United States government. So here we are. Now, in 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson decided that Black folks ought to be included in the history of this nation. And he was rebuked, of course, in every movement, but he still got it in to where it was called Negro History Week. The first week in February, that covered the second week in February, that covered the birth date of Lincoln as well as Frederick Douglass. And then in 1970, with the students at Kent State, and some of the Black students at Kent State declared in 1970 it should be African American or Black History Month. And every president since 1976 has honored February as being Black History Month. So why do we need Black History Month? Well, because it needs to prick at the conscience and to deal with the legacy of slavery and the role that those of us who are descendants of slaves played in the development of this nation. This nation could not have existed without slavery. And if you're working for somebody and don't have to pay them, you can get pretty rich. And so that started what we call today in America, the American way of life. And also, it created an atmosphere that exists today. Now, who would have thought then in America we'd be censoring what in our libraries? And the whole theme is, and laws have been passed even in the state of Missouri and those in other states that, and Florida, DeSantis, who seems to be one of the leading contenders in the next Republican race, says that there's no value of African-American history. Come on, America. There's no value of African-American history when this nation was built on our backs as slaves, our ancestors. Is there the possibility that America never intended to give full freedom and equality to the descendants of slaves? Now, let's go further. Let's back up just a little bit, though. There's a great document that was penned across the parched paper, drafted by Thomas Jefferson, called the Declaration of Independence. Those of you who not history buffs, but maybe in your history classes in elementary, middle school or high school or college, took the course, or the Declaration of Independence was given to you, or you had to read it. And when I was in the 6th grade, I never shall forget, 6th grade, I'm 90 years old, so when I was in the 6th grade, that's a couple of years ago. But I remember we had to learn certain parts of the Declaration of Independence. We had to stand in front of our class and recite it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But our Black teachers, I came out of segregated schools up until even through junior college. Those of you in Kansas City may not know that the 3rd floor of Lincoln High School was Lincoln Junior College, because we couldn't go to the white junior college at 39th and McGee. But at the same time, when Thomas Jefferson penned across those parched paper, that Declaration of Independence, that didn't apply to our ancestors who are African ancestors, because we were chattel. And then in 1887, at the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia, to form a more perfect union. Maybe that's why the Liberty Bell cracked, because it knew that it would not be, and has not been, and maybe will not be, a perfect union. And the only time that it was mentioned about slaves was when the South said when with drafting of the Constitution, where you have 2 senators from every state, but Congress is based on population. How many congresspersons you have that represent your state. And the South said, we got more slaves than we got white folks. This ain't gonna work. So they decided to do what? Count the slaves at 3/5 of a person. This is a human being, you all. Count slaves as 3/5 of a person. And then the first 10 articles of the Bill of Rights said nothing about slavery. And so here we are. Is there the possibility that this nation of ours never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free and have equal rights in these United States of America? And there's something called the 1619 Project that originated by a reporter for the New York Times. And everybody's fighting that because it talks about the legacy of slavery and the contributions that the originated of Black History Week, Dr. Carter U. Wisdom, talked about back in 1926. So here we are 158 years later, after the 13th Amendment, freeing the slave, still trying to be free. Is there the possibility that America never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free and equal? Now, let's talk about today. Laws are being passed around this nation. Voting rights, attacked. Affirmative action, attacked. The Supreme Court now has a case that's pending, and based on what the Supreme Court is now doing on a 6-3 vote, more than likely affirmative action is going to be reversed. And all it does is say that everyone has a right for employment, these rights for promotions, regardless if it's in where it is. And I would be willing to wager any of you that Supreme Court, probably in a 6-3 vote, will say that affirmative action is no longer needed. The Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, will it pass? Not with the Congress the way it is today. But even when it was Democrat president, Democrat Senate, Democrat Congress, it hasn't come up to pass. So here's the other possibility. America never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free. And then the issue where the Second Amendment and guns are involved. Now, the Second Amendment specifically said militia. Does that mean the Supreme Court has been reviewing that differently? That it means that everybody can carry an AR-15 or AK-47 or extended magazines and guns and all those kind of things? It's a mentality. And after Black Lives Matter movement, folks began to buy guns where the gun dealers ran out of guns. Who are those guns for? And then we have a climate to where anti-Semitism and racism, xenophobia are now a part of the conversation, to the extent that there are those that who are in leadership roles contribute to anti-Semitism and racism and homophobia and xenophobia. 21st century, 2022, 23. And so I ask each one of us, what is our role as it relates to what I've just ended up? If, in fact, there's a possibility that America never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free, if you buy into that, then what can we do to make a difference? That's the challenge. And so I challenge each one of us to deal with our own individual mindset as to whether or not what role we individually can play and collectively can play, and see it to it that America lives up to its promise of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness for all Americans, regardless of color, religion, race, sexual orientation, gender, ethnicity, whatever the case might be. There's a lady that stands in the harbor that's beckoning those to come to these temple shores. Statue of Liberty. And give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, and promising them the golden door. But there are those of us, our First Nation people, and those of us whose ancestors came into the bows of ships, never saw that side of the lady in the harbor. They did not beckon for us to come to these temperate shores. But there are those who are already here. And then those of us who were brought in, our ancestors brought in chains. Don't you think it's time that we as Americans realize that, if not now, when, for freedom and justice for everyone? Also, I'm reminded of the situation that I experienced, and it's in my book, Binding Us Together. And I suspect, and I suspect now, you better hurry up and buy my book, because they might ban it from bookshelves in libraries and even in the private sector, Barnes and Nobles and Rainy Day and whatever. But I remember as growing up, the kind of things that I endured right here in Kansas City as a little Black kid. I remember I grew up, my family moved into an all-white area, which was poor. Now, let me share that word poor with you. Some of my brothers and sisters on here of my complexion remember that, and they're old enough, that we were poor, but some of the white folks were poor. Now, there's a difference between poor and po. So we were into a po white area. So after fighting and name calling, I was the only Black kid in there, only Black family. We became friends. Of course, then I had to defend them, because you know what they were called because of the relationship with me. But when I moved there into the area, they said, you know, there's a Velvet Freeze ice cream parlor at 31st and Indiana. And it's the best ice cream. And so At that time, you could buy pop, you could find pop bottles and turn them in and get 2 cents. And so we were all hustling pop bottles to see if so I could go up to Velvet Freeze and get my ice cream cone. There were 5 of us. Tommy Finley was the oldest. He was 2 years old. We were 9, 8, 9, and 10. Billy was the youngest, and he was about 7. So we get there, and when the sons are getting the door, and the person said I couldn't come in. So my white friends had to buy my ice cream cone and bring it out to me so that I could eat it. It was one of the first times that I realized that something was wrong with me. The folks inside didn't even know me. And I didn't realize that race was the issue at that age. My folks didn't talk about race. My adopted parents questioned itself, but didn't talk about racism. That never was a part of their vocabulary. They talk about segregation, discrimination, but not in my presence. And then another time when one of our neighbors had a youngster in the playpen in the backyard, and some kids came by and were throwing rocks at the dog, and she came out and admonished them, and they cursed out, and they went on. She called the police. And my friends and I were walking, and the police picked us up, brought us back there to be identified. And the woman there said, no, said, I know Alvin and Bobby and Billy and Tommy. Said, they live right over on Quincy. This was on Brighton. You can see my house. She said, Alvin even goes to the store to get prescriptions for my brother, who's bedridden. So we decided to walk off towards my house because my mother fed everybody. Everybody knew Miss Brooks because that lunch meat and bread and pickles and all, mustard and everything, she fed everybody, potato chips, so everybody hung out at my house. And so we started home, and the police officer said, come and get back in the car. They drove us around, and they were telling my wife, and we're all piled up in this police car, 5 of us, in the backseat police car, 2 white officers. One of them, the one who was the oldest officer and looked like he was about 14 months pregnant. He'd been drinking, and we could tell that he'd been drinking. And he was telling them what they should not associate with me. And I was the N-word, this, and that although they were white trash, they had no business fooling around with this N. And if he had caught him again, what he's gonna do to him? They said, well, he's my friend. He can't be your friend because he's an N. And we drove around, and eventually they came down to the foot of the Brighton Hill, down where the Veterans Hospital is, just there on East Linwood, those of you from Kansas City. And everybody get out the car. And just as I got ready to get out, I was sitting on somebody, but I got out, and he said, you hold on. And he pulled his gun and he cocked it. The other officer who was driving never got out the car. He cocked it. He said, Ian, you see that hill? If you're black, Ian, ask and make it to the top of that hill before I shoot you're free in. And I'm crying and hollering and screaming, please don't shoot me. And I'm backing up, screaming. And he's run in, run. And my white friend, don't shoot Alvin, don't shoot Alvin. Billy jumped up on his arm and the gun went off. And we ran up the hill. I was running as fast backwards as they were running forward. And we got up to the top of the hill, we just laughed and everything. You know, every time we would get together and we thought we were in trouble, we'd find a piece of glass, Duran, and we would prick our fingers and we became blood brothers. And, you know, I guess all of my other 4 white friends don't realize they got some black blood in them. But I hope they're not on here. I don't want them to commit suicide or anything, but we did that. So Billy disappeared. Billy was like an old refrigerator. He couldn't keep any, he couldn't keep all icebox. He couldn't keep any. So pretty soon my mother called me and we all went over there and she said, what's this about police shooting at you? And I said, nobody's shooting at him. And no, and she said, Billy said, yes, they did. Police officer shot at Alvin. So my mother called the police station. About a half hour, 45 minutes later, they sent out a sergeant. My mother went over to the car and talked to him. He never got out the car. He called each one of them, me first and the other 4 right after, then get our statements. He never pulled out a pencil or pad. He told my mother through the window of the police car, he said, we'll investigate this and get back with you. And this is 2023, the 1st of February. He hasn't gotten back to my mom, who's gone on to glory yet. When I graduated from Lincoln Junior College, first one when I went to the police department in 1954, I wanted to finish my sophomore year in college. So I asked him to let me start June 1, 1954, rather than January 1, 54. When I got into the institution, I found out what racism really was. I was 21, 22 years old. And one of my final stories of race, there was a police officer named William Kennedy who was killed at 18th and Vine in front of the Lincoln Theater, 18th and Lydia. And I was a police officer, I hadn't been on for a year. This was the 5th of May, 1955. I wouldn't have had my probation period into the 1st of June. And I heard these shots. And I said, what is somebody using firecrackers in May? So I went around, and a fellow came to me and said, handed a gun in the car and said, that's Bill Kennedy's gun. That's him that got shot. And I could see that some people were holding him up. His whole shoulder was shot off. And he said, there's the car that the fellow got away that shot Bill Kennedy. So I chased the car and got behind the liquor store in the drive in the alley. Two of my white colleagues came up. They were in plain clothes. They emptied their 6 guns at Herschel Williams, who was the defendant, or who was the suspect. And I had the shotgun. I had fired one shot into the car, into the fender of the car, saying, come out, police officer, come out with your hands up. And by that time, when he's trying to get over the fence, that's when they emptied it, and nobody hit him. And I had the shotgun. They hollered, shoot the bastard, shoot the bastard. Well, I could see his hand. I had my spotlight on him. I could see his hand on the fence. I didn't shoot him, he went over the fence. So I confiscated the gun and waited for the detectives to come and everything. And then the crowd gathered up at the next block. We were in the 1600 block of Tracy and 1600 block of Lydia. And when we came up, there was Eugene Pond was a major in charge of the investigation unit. And after I had secured everything, it was just a few feet from where they were gathered. Now we're talking about a dozen plus police officers. And the major said, where's the bastard? Where's the bastard? I didn't know he was talking about. And somebody said, there he is. And I'm walking up towards him. And he said, he cursed me from everything but called me a nigger. Punched me in my shoulder. And he's about 5'7", 8". I was 5'11". My mother told me when I was coming up, she said, baby, there'll be times when white people will say something to you and do something to you. You may not be able to do or say anything about it, but at least be man enough to let them know that you know it's wrong and you don't like it. 22 years old, the major of the police department, of the investigation unit, was poking me in the chest and telling me what a no good so-and-so I was, and I was no better than the one who had shot Bill Kennedy. I thought about what my mama said, and I said, Major, are you finished? And he said, your GD right. I said, Major, you or no one else can tell me when to kill somebody. And I walked away. And I knew he told me that was my last night on the job, my last day on the job. So after everything had happened, and went back to the place with my brother-in-law, picked me up and went back to the place where people were gathered. And people were saying, Brooks, you were a hero. We heard what happened up there in the alley. He said, you didn't kill Herschel for the white folks. All the brothers on the police department, but a few of us, began to call me. And I figured that next night when I came to work on 4 to 12, that morning, somebody said, bring all your stuff in. It's all over for you. I never heard a word from him except that roll call, the Lieutenant Mullen said, give Al Brooks a big hand for his work that he did last night. I was on the police department for 10 years, and I passed the sergeant exam for 3 times and the third time was number 11 out of 25. I was told by the chief, Clarence Kelly, who went to the FBI under Nixon, director of FBI. I told him about the injustice that I had received. He told me, so well, I'm gonna make 25 sergeants in the next 2 years. If you're in the top 25, I'll make you. It got down to my name. They skipped me and went and picked up number 26. So I've lived, my friends, racism, segregation, discrimination based on the color of my skin, not the content of my character. And so I pose the question today to those of us on this Zoom and to America in general. Is there the possibility that this nation of Ireland, land of the free, home of the brave, never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free? And so now we got from the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Why we need a Voting Rights Act in 2022, 2023, when we had the right to vote in the 15th Amendment back in 1867. So that's my challenge to each one of us on this Zoom. And I'd like to leave some time, Deron, if it's okay for you and our viewers, if there are any questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to further this discussion.
Well, thank you, Mr. Brooks. I appreciate the conversation that you have with us today. And we've got quite a few people on the Zoom call here today. If you feel comfortable and you have questions for Mr. Brooks, please put them in the Q&A chat. And I will be happy to answer any of the questions and pose them to Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks, we do have a question. The question was, what is the title of your book and where can they purchase it?
Well, the title is Binding Us Together, and it can be purchased at Barnes & Noble or Rainy Day. And if you catch me right, I may have one or two in my car at all times. They're a couple of dollars cheaper if you get it from me.
Okay.
But thank you for the inquiry.
And how much is the book?
It's $30 from me, and it's $32 something if you get it at one of the stores, because I don't charge any taxes. And mine goes towards the scholarship fund that my daughter's now open in my wife's name and my name, Carolyn Brooks, Binding Us Together Scholarship at Penn Valley Community College. Okay.
One of the other questions I have too is you served on the city council for 8 years, and two-part question is what made you want to run for the city council? And then the second follow-up to that was what is your biggest regret about not winning the mayor's race?
Well, I was coerced to run for the city council by Kay Barnes, who was going to run for mayor, a longtime friend of mine, and we'd done some consultant work together. And she called me in March of, I guess it was 1997, and said she's getting ready to run for mayor. She wanted me to run for the 6th district at large. And I said, Kay, politics ain't my game. And she said, but you think about it. So in June, we had another meeting. After talking to my wife and my kids and a few other responsible people, I decided to run. And won 2 terms without any other person's filing. With regard, Deron, I don't have any regrets for not winning the mayor's race. I lost by 950 votes. I won over Funkau the 10,000 votes south of the river, but he picked up the ground north of the river, and I lost by 950 votes. It was a blessing in disguise. A blessing in disguise because normally in about a year or 18 months out, you better start getting ready to run for the second term if you haven't turned out. And I would have had to done that. But in January of 11, both my wife and I came down with cancer. And I had prostate, and she had a rare women's cancer called peritoneal in the stomach. And she didn't survive hers after 2 years. And I would not have been able to run for the second term or even be a full-time mayor the last 18 months of my term. So it was a blessing in disguise. God knows better. And I never looked back. It was one of the best things that I didn't win. But you all got saddled with somebody else for 4 years, and the rest of it's history.
So, Mr. Brooks, kind of tell the viewers, what are you doing now? I know that you are very involved with your book. You wrote your book, you're promoting your book. But what are you doing now? I know you serve on a number of boards, and you recently just got an award from the Jewish Relations Foundation, I saw. So what is Alvin Brooks doing today? By the way, you're 90 and you'll be 91 in May. So what are you doing now?
And I told you And all of the viewers, I want you to mark your calendar for May 3rd, 2032, May 3rd. That'll be my 100th birthday. I'm inviting all of you out there, and I hope you'll be able to be here in Kansas City. That's where I'll be. And I know Duran is young enough that he will be there, and I'll be there. I'm old enough that I'll be there. I'm beginning to work on my second book with my editor, Reverend Vern Barnett, who was my editor with me on my first book. And it's going to be for youth. And my original manuscript was 800 and some pages. And when I went to Andrews McMill, the publisher in Kansas City, were great people, great work with me. And they agreed to work with me on my second book. But it's going to be for young people. And a lot of my, in my manuscript that I don't have to do any research, just that I already started pulling out parts that would meet the needs of middle school and high school youngsters. So that's one of my and I'm not accepting any more boards and all that. I hate to say no. Speaking, as long as I can remember something, and folks don't know whether I'm remembered or not. But I love to speak on subjects like we're talking about today. So that's what I'm doing a lot. And of course, you were talking about the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, American Jewish Committee gave me the Henry W. Block Award for Human Relations, one of the Grammys of the awards. And of course, the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce gave me their Citizens of the Year award. And one of the things that really, and I don't want to sound to our viewers ego, because if my ego hasn't been stroked in these many years, it's too late now. But in 1956, I've been on the police department 2 years. I wanted to finish my probationary period there, but I was trying to get a shift where I could go back and get my undergraduate degree. And the police department would not cooperate. Whether I had a lieutenant say, well, do you want to be a police officer, you want to be an educator? I said, can you do both? Or you want to get an education, can you do both? And he said, not around here. But finally, I got a captain who allowed me to get frozen on 2 shifts. That was 4 to 12 and 12 days, where I can go to school in the daytime. So I took my 68 hours up to Rockhurst College. And they did not want to give me credit for my last semester, South semester. I had to take some courses. I said, well, I had a 3.5, and they had no D's, no C's, but that wasn't good enough. And they said, well, you can. So I didn't want to go to KCU. It was a private university. I figured that the Jesuit school there, and we were Catholic most of the time. We I try to go to Rockhurst. Now let's fast forward. Somebody forgot to. Anyway, let's fast forward to 2021. So I went. Well, let me just go back. I went to KCU, which was private, and then it became, when I got my undergraduate degree, it was the University of Missouri at Kansas City. It became a part of Missouri University system. In the summer of 2021, the president of Rockhurst University, Father Ed Curran, called me. We'd become very good friends. I don't mean associates, or some of my best friends are, but Father Tom Curran and I were brothers and friends of different mothers, different fathers, but brothers and friends. And he called me and he said, I'd like to take you to lunch. I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you, and I hope you'll say yes. A question I'd like to ask you, I hope you say yes. So we had lunch together, and he said, this is my last year. I've been told that I've been here 16 years, and it's time for me to go. So next year, 2022, I have to move on. He said, but I've been asked by a number of people, what do I want to leave as a legacy with my 16 years here? And he said, I want a structure on campus for faith justice. And I want it named after Al Brooks. And so I shed tears. I said, Father, you got to be kidding. This is a white Jesuit university. There's a significant number of students of color, asking me, a black man, to name a building on the university campus after me. So I said, Father, I have 5 daughters who are my trustees. I've got to run this past them. I say yes, but they could veto it, but I doubt it. Really. So the 3 out of town and 2 in the city. We on and with some of the other folks at Rockhurst, and he mentioned to my daughter, and we said yes. It's an $8 million project. We've already raised about 6.4 million and ready to start construction. It'll be the Alvin Brooks Center for Faith Justice.
And Mr. Brooks, where will it be on campus?
It'll be facing Truce there,
Okay.
on the east side of Truce. In Kansas City, Truce is the east-west is the Mason-Dixon line. And nothing seems to take place east of Truce, but a lot west of Truce. That's not totally true, but it can be pretty much, it's almost totally true. So it'll be facing there, where the center is there now, where the security is on there, right near the, and that's where they have meetings. That they will renovate that and then add the rest all the way down to 54th Street, new structure.
Oh, that's great.
It'll face Truth. The Alvin Brooks Center for Faith Justice. God works in mysterious ways, doesn't God work in mysterious ways? Yes.
No, that's wonderful. We also had another request too. Someone wrote on the chat, if you would be willing to do a book club and review your book, do it like a book with a book club with regard to the book that you wrote. Would you be willing to do that via Zoom?
I do it all the time, and if they buy my book, but I'd love to do that. Yes, so just give them my email address and have them contact me. It's been an interesting journey for me. Born of a 14-year-old mother, Thomasine Gilder, and a 17-year-old father, Wildemar Herring, and didn't know I was adopted by the Brooks until I was 22 years old. And I
think that remains to be seen. Most people don't know that about you. I know, but a lot of people don't know that you were adopted.
Yeah, and I didn't know I was adopted until I was 22 years old. I was on the police department when this lady began to write to me in August of 1954. I was in the police academy, and she wrote to me, and what she had done, she'd written to the school district and said, I'm trying to locate this young man born May 3rd, 1932 in North Little Rock, Arkansas, Pulaski County. And so what they did, they just stuck that letter. Segregation sometimes ain't worst thing, because if I had moved, we were still living in the same place, in segregated area. And it came to me, and she began to write, and I didn't answer. So I went out to my father, and I said, Dad, this woman writing me and asking a lot of questions about you and about mother and me. I don't even know what she's talking about. And he said, what's her name? And when I said Thomasine, he looked like he'd seen a ghost, and tears came into his eyes. And he got himself together, his composure together. He said, son, if I were you, I wouldn't be answering stuff like that. You never know what people's intentions are. But when I went back home, I said to my wife, I said, Carol, I said, when I told Dad about that woman in writing, when I mentioned her name, he looked like he'd seen a ghost or something. I said, something wrong. So I continued to correspond back. And in October, I told her about, I was on the police department at that time, had 3 children and wanted to go back to school and to college and this kind of thing. That was my wife's name and those things. And in her October letter, she said, I hope I'll know my grandkids better than I know my son. And that shook me and my wife. And I said, what? So I never said anything to my dad about this. And we began to talk by way of phone. She said, could I come visit you all over the Christmas holiday, say from Christmas Day up into New Year's Eve, and over the phone. And my wife was listening, didn't have the speakerphones. And we said, and I said, yes. I worked the dog watch that Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day, actually. And when I got off, the kids were, we had Ronald was the oldest, and Estelle was the next, and then the baby was Carrie. And so they weren't supposed to come downstairs to see what Santa Claus had brought them until I came into the house. When I came in, I said, ho, 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 Santa Claus. And they came down, the two of them, and Carol came down holding with the baby. And so when the phone would ring, I would answer, Merry Christmas, Brooks Resident. And I had stripped down to my pants and some house shoes and t-shirt. Wintertime was cold out there, but no snow, but it had been cold out that night. And when I answered it this time, I could hear in the background, brand of Continental, TWA, flight so and so. And the voice said, Alvin. I said, yes. She said, this is your mother. I'm at the airport. Can you pick me up? So I said, yes. So I told my wife, I said, Mama's at the airport. My mother's at the airport. So, yeah. And on the way down there, I got to thinking, I don't know what my mother looked like. And I know she don't know what I look like. But thank God, weren't too many Black folks flying that Christmas Day, 1954. And there she was, with a fur across her arm, with a fur hat to match the fur across her arm, a red two-piece suit with a white blouse and a red, almost like a tie, luggage there. And I saw myself. And we cried right there in the middle of the airport, the old downtown airport then. So she stayed, and that afternoon, she helped my wife cook, Carol cook. And I knew my dad was coming over for dinner, and he was probably in his sin, what we call that, in his sin. He's probably been drinking quite a bit because that's what took him away from here, cirrhosis of the liver. But he came in, and she said to me, she said, don't introduce me as Thomasine, just say this as a friend, and let's just eat first, you know. And he was in his sin when he came in and had his coat on and everything, and sat down, and my wife said, Mr. Brooks, don't you think you better take your coat off and wash your hands and everything like that, and your hat? Okay, daughter. So I blessed the food and everything. And during the dinner, she said, Mr. Brooks, do you know who I am? Well, I had introduced her as Miss Davis. That was her married name. And he said, yeah, the boy said, you Miss Davis. He said, no, I'm Thomasine. He jumped up from the table, crying and screaming like a baby, and went upstairs. He always had a room in our home because where he lived, where I grew up was, inside toilet, no inside heat except the big pot-bellied stove. And he begged her not to say that he was not my father. And she said, Mr. Brooks, I can't lie to him. She said, he will find out because I will eventually tell him. But we became very close. 9 years later, my mother found my biological father, and the three of us became very close. In fact, my biological father, Wilbur Lamar Herring, moved to Kansas City with his family. So I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and they're the same age as my kids. But I've been blessed, and things, if you have to read my book, but things fall in for me throughout my 90 years. When I was still in the infant stage, after my mother left me with the Brookses, I was suffering from something where I couldn't keep anything on my stomach. I regurgitate everything, and so my mother, I'm talking about Estelle Brooks, my adopted mother, caught that bus and went up to St. Louis, where she had a sister, and to the Homer G. Phillips Health Center, she believed it was, which became the Homer G. Phillips Hospital for Negro patients, quote unquote. And they told her there that they didn't know what was wrong with me, but I could not live beyond age 50 because I would be dying from malnutrition. And so what happened was that my mother came back to Arkansas, and very despondent after telling my dad what was going on. And one Sunday, an herb doctor came by, an old herb doctor. And they were telling him what had occurred. And he said, Brooks said, they say that goat's milk is good for ulcerated stomach. They used to call it ulcerated stomach, not just call it ulcers. He said, you might want to try to put that in your own goat's milk. My dad put a tank of gas and $5 and went down to Lake Village, Arkansas, and bought a Saiyan goat. for $1.75. A singing goat. A singing goat is white with pink eyes and pink nose and pink ears. And we named the goat Nanny. And I was on goat's milk in my junior year of high school. So I hope there's nobody viewing this Zoom, this virtual, would talk anything bad about goats, because I will get in your chest, because the goats is the one that called me to be here at age 90. And it coated my stomach and allowed food to stay down where cow's milk and would not allow to do that. And that other carnation and pet come in cans. So I'm blessed. And then to my mother found me before I passed, and my biological, my adopted mother had passed in 1950, the year I graduated from high school. But everything just falls into place for me. And this whole theory that I have, it's not theory, it's a reality. The challenge the question that I raised is that a possibility, and it's true. Now, let me share this. There are beneficiaries of this, I call it a structural racist system. I wrote an essay, an analysis of America's structural racist system as viewed by an 88-year-old Black man. That was 88 years old then. That's the same year my book came out. And it was an addendum to something that I had written for the Kansas City Call in 1970, the first year we celebrated Black History Month. I was talking to Miss Lucille Bluford about this. I said, what are we going to do? I said, are we just going to tell you this? It's more than just a celebration. We're talking about the birth of a people. We're talking about the slavery of human beings. We're talking about this. And she said, Brooks, this thing is really bothering you. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, well, write me an article and I'll review it. If it's worthwhile, I'll print it. And then I'll come up with a editorial, in which I did, and it came with an editorial. And when I was writing my book, I ran across this old article. It was all yellow and brittle. And I began to then think about expanding upon that. 50 years later, that was then. Now we're talking about 158 years later, we're still talking about the rights of the descendants of slaves. Now there are some beneficiaries now of slavery. There are sisters and brothers of the lighter hue. You're the beneficiaries of what your great-great-grandparents did. And you ought to be up to trying to make it right. And let me say this, and this is very respectful. If this nation of 330 million plus people is to ever give equal rights, equal protection to the descendants of slaves, there's going to have to be our brothers and sisters of the lighter hue that step up and make it happen, because we don't have the numbers. If you put Jews and Blacks and Hispanics and gays and other ethnic and racial groups together, you still don't have the political power to make significant changes to assure that the descendants of slaves, that the First Nation people, and all other folks who are discriminated against based on their gender, sexual orientation, their religion, ethnicity. It's going to depend upon those of our brothers and sisters of the lighter hue, who are in the majority. Democrats, Republicans, vegetarians, anyway, have to make the difference. You have to make the difference, not us. We can continue to demonstrate, agitate, and all that, but when it comes down to it, the change would have to come to the hearts and the minds and the faith of those who are in control. And it ain't us, and it won't be us. So I see we still got some time. We got about 4 or 5 minutes. So if anybody else got any questions or any response, I'd love to hear it.
Well, Mr. Brooks, first I want to thank you for doing this and kicking off of our Black History Swope Health Lunch and Learn series. We've got 3 more panelists this week. We really appreciate you taking this hour with us. And I want to say thank you for one other reason, because many people don't know this, but you have given back to the community in a number of ways. But one thing that you did while in office was that you always sort of mentored a younger generation of people, and all of us now are serving in public service. Myself, Jermaine Reed, and Melissa Robinson, all serving in public service today. And so we just thank you for giving us an opportunity and mentoring us. And just being who you are as a leader in the community. So again, thank you for being with us today. And I appreciate that.
And listen, I'm proud of all of you. And my life, I had one son, but I have 17 grandkids, 45 great, 15 great, and I just had another great born in Japan to my grandson who's in the Navy and aboard the SS Eisenhower aircraft carrier. And I understand that there'll be 6 or 7 more born this year. Now, one of my daughters, Rosalind, predicts there'll be 10 born. So I will the descendants of Alvin and Carol Brooks will go on to the end of the world, the way they're producing and all. But it's Ron and Melissa and Jermaine and others. I've taken years ago, I realized how difficult it was for little Black boys to grow up to be men in America. And I've taken it upon myself as a committee of one to try to make a difference beyond not only with Ronald, my son, but also with my grandsons and my great-grands who I've had a relationship with. All my grandsons I have. And I try to tell them about being proud and Black and never use the color of their skin as an excuse for something that goes wrong. You're not excelling, you're not doing the best you can. And I'll continue to do that. And as you may know, I'm bringing to Kansas City the 22nd to the 25th, the youngest mayor known in the history of this nation, 18-year-old Jalen Smith, who's mayor of Earl, Arkansas, right outside of Memphis. And I've been to Earl, Arkansas numerous times, little Black city there. And he's the mayor. He'll be in Kansas City and speaking around, and he and his mom and his twin brother and his senior advisor. And so I just trying to help as much as I can, not only those within the city, but anytime I come in contact with African-American males who are struggling to be men, I'll do my best until I'm knocking on the pearly gates to do with what I can to help all of you. And I think that's my mission. I think God puts us here for certain missions, and I think that that's one of mine. And let me close with a couple of things. Number one, I believe in Scripture, and that's what bothers me when you can't rewrite Scripture, you can't rewrite history, and folks the folks who are trying to keep out of the books about slavery and fearful that white kids will hate themselves and hate their country. But it's nothing like there's something called reconciliation, but reconciliation has to be based on the truth. You cannot reconcile any difference unless you tell the truth, and the truth must be told. But I'm very concerned about in the scripture says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth and everything therein, the creatures that crawl, the fowl of the air, the fish of the sea, and then decided to make humankind in the likeness and image of the Creator. That means that each one of us, all of us, are connected, all 6 billion of us on planet Earth. And that does not exclude the 330 million in the United States of America. We're brothers and sisters. And sometime, one day, I hope and pray that we'll understand that we are. And that the divisiveness that's occurred in this nation, that there will be enough people of faith that'll stand up and have enough courage, even if they turn the mic off, to say that these are our brothers and sisters and that this nation has to live up to its promise, regardless of whether or not it was founded on that separation and not giving full access and equality and inclusion to descendants of slaves and First Nation people. Now is the time. Now let me close with this. A 9-line poem from the late Dr. Benjamin Mays of Morehouse College, and I think I may have my grandson on somewhere now. A couple of them are from Morehouse men. I have 5 or 7 who are Morehouse men. And Dr. Benjamin Mays wrote a poem, and it's called God's Minute. It's only 9 lines, but it's so profound. And he says, I've only just a minute, only 60 seconds in it. It was forced upon me. I didn't use it, can't do anything, abuse it, but it's me that use it. But I must do everything I can to make sure that it uses. And today, I hope and pray that we use our minute wisely on behalf of each other, because we're all brothers and sisters. God bless you. God bless all of our viewers. Duran, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brooks, and it was an honor to have you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at noon for the second series of the Swope Health Lunch and Learn. Thank you again, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you. God bless you.